It's that time of year again. As we look back on 12 months of music, which albums were the ones that stood the test of time? Well, so far anyway. It's time to reveal my top 10 albums of 2019. Coming up next on Track by Track. Hey everybody, my name's Kyle and this is Track by Track, music reviews, news, and commentary. Thanks for tuning in today, and if this is your first time here, please take a second to click subscribe so that you won't miss future reviews and more. Looking back at 2019, I had what I would say was one of my most challenging years in terms of preparing a top 10 list. Make no mistake, there was plenty of great music over the past 12 months, but what I found was that in many cases you could easily separate that music into two categories. Albums that were great music and great music that came together as an album. Now that may sound confusing, but hopefully as we start digging into this year's top 10, you'll start to see examples of both. Personally, I'm a big fan of the album format. I truly appreciate when an artist puts out a collection of music that genuinely feels like a single cohesive artistic statement rather than merely an assortment of songs. In 2019, there were several instances where I found albums, true albums in the classic sense of the word, that felt like they worked best as a whole rather than on a track-by-track basis. In today's streaming music culture, that's becoming more and more of a rarity, so when I discovered those types of experiences, I found that I appreciated them even more. Your mileage may vary, of course, and that's kind of the standard disclaimer that every review should be prefaced with, especially when it comes to year-end lists. I may call this the top 10 best albums of the year, but really, it's just my personal opinion. It's all based on my personal taste, and that plays a huge part both in what you'll see on my list and what you won't see on my list. For example, many other year-end lists have seen albums by Brittany Howard and Angel Olsen ranking near the top, but neither of those appear on my list. I did check them both out, and honestly, I wanted very much to like, if not love, both of those albums, especially Angel Olsen. But ultimately, neither album clicked for me. Maybe they did for you, and if so, great. Both are talented artists that have been and will remain on my musical radar. But their 2019 efforts simply didn't resonate for me. And as always, I should add a comment about genre. If you spent any time at all watching this channel, you know I'm not usually into many of the mainstream acts that tend to lean more toward rap or R&B. That's just not my thing most of the time. So while releases from Ariana Grande and Tyler the Creator may rank high on other year-end lists, you won't find them here. And honestly, if you're a regular track-by-track viewer, that's probably why you're here, right? Right. So without further ado, let's run down my top 10 best albums of 2019. Kicking off this year's list is one of my favorite bedroom pop artists, Jay Som. On Anak Ko, multi-instrumentalist Melina Duterte delivers what in many ways feels like a continuation of her outstanding 2017 album, Everybody Works. That album ranked pretty high in my top 10 that year, and Anak Ko also manages to break into my top 10 this year. For me, the lo-fi nature of this production goes a long way toward contributing to its charisma. This is not a glossy mainstream product by some A-list artist, and yet it shines so much brighter than albums by so many other major acts that didn't make my top 10 this year. I love the idea that anyone can be so empowered to make the music that they want with minimal resources and still find a larger audience. And number 9 on this year's list is a concept album of sorts. On No Man's Land, singer-songwriter Frank Turner pays tribute to a varied assortment of women from all walks of history, some well-known like Sister Rosetta Tharpe and the ill-fated first teacher in space, Krista McAuliffe, while others are decidedly more obscure, including Turner's own mother. This would be an ambitious project in any circumstances, but for a man to take on such a challenge in the hashtag #MeToo era is brave to say the least. Fortunately, Turner pulls it off in admirable fashion, often wearing his respect for his subjects boldly on his sleeve. Of course, it's hard to fully appreciate the significance of these women within the context of a 4-minute song, which is why Frank Turner's companion podcast, Tales from No Man's Land, is essential listening for a deeper dive into the stories behind these extraordinary women. Next up is a criminally underrated rock and roll band, and I truly mean rock and roll. Rival Sons' sound is not so much a throwback as it is simply a scarcity in today's musical landscape. Last year, music blogs were falling all over themselves to herald Greta Van Fleet as the return of great American rock and roll. Meanwhile, rival Sons was preparing their fantastic sixth album, Feral Roots, which launched with a roar back in January 2019. It took me a while to catch up to this one, but man, I'm glad I did. Forget about the Led Zeppelin debate over that other band. Rival Sons is the real deal, and what, in my opinion, good old guitar rock needs a lot more of today. At number 7 on my top 10 is an album that actually topped many other year-end lists, and that's Norman fucking Rockwell by Lana Del Rey. This album was a strong return to form for Del Rey. She made such a massive impact with Born to Die and Ultraviolence back in 2012 and 2014, but on both the Honeymoon and Lust for Life albums, I kind of felt like she lost her spark. But in 2019, after months of teasing new music and dropping advanced singles, Lana Del Rey once again delivered on the early promise of her first albums with one of the most artistically cohesive albums of the year. This is truly an album to experience from start to finish, which in an era of single streams is really saying something. Coming in at number 6 is one of the best pop albums that I've heard in a long time. Let me tell you, if all you know of Carly Rae Jepsen is her viral 2012 hit Call Me Maybe, you're really missing out. Since that song, or perhaps in spite of it, Jepsen has consistently released some of the most infectious pop music you're likely to hear, and Dedication is no exception. In a similar way to how rival Sons' brand of rock and roll is so refreshing, Carly Rae Jepsen's expertly crafted pop sound is a welcome change of pace from so much of what dominates the charts today. Dedicated was easily one of my most played albums of 2019. I love the high energy, feel-good vibe of it all, which, if I'm being honest, is probably the antithesis of Lana Del Rey's album. Just saying. As we move into the top half of the top 10, we have what was unquestionably one of my most anticipated albums of 2019. Vampire Weekend took 6 long years to deliver their 4th album, Father of the Bride, and I was starting to get worried. Not worried that it wouldn't happen, but worried that it wouldn't live up to the high standard that the band set with their first 3 albums. As it turns out, Album 4 was a truly evolutionary step for the band. As much as I would have hoped for quote-unquote more of the same with this album, I was pleasantly surprised with where Vampire Weekend actually ended up on Father of the Bride. With the departure of founding member Rostam, this album was bound to see some kind of departure from their tried and true sound. Not everyone liked where Ezra took things here, and that's fair, I suppose. But personally, I have to say that now I'm excited to see where this new direction takes the music. I just hope that we won't have to wait 6 more years to find out the answer. Alright, as I got into my top 4 albums of 2019, things got really tough. The truth of the matter is, I could have probably randomly ranked my top 4 albums and been just as happy with the way the list turned out. These are 4 outstanding albums, each of which I've reviewed on the channel and each of which has its own unique merits. 2 of them are from major artists that everyone knows, while the other 2 are from newer acts that I hope you'll take the time to discover. So at number 4, it's Walk Through Fire, the debut album from UK country soul singer-songwriter Yola. When I reviewed this album back in February, I speculated that it would end up being one of the best albums of the year, and indeed it was. I absolutely love the fresh sound on this album, flawlessly blending genres with producer Dan Auerbach of the Black Keys manning the boards. Yola has certainly been a rising star in 2019, even nabbing a Grammy nomination in the highly competitive category of Best New Artist. I've got a chance to see her perform live earlier this year, and let me tell you, she's the real deal. And if you're just now catching the Yola buzz, there's certainly been no better time. She's just released a deluxe edition of her Walk Through Fire album, which adds 2 new tracks, including a brilliant cover of Elton John's Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. Needless to say, don't miss it. My number 3 album for 2019 is yet another release that was very highly anticipated for me. In 2016, R&B singer Gallant's debut album Ology was far and away my favorite album of the year. I even included it as part of my Great 28 series in 2017. This year, Gallant returned with his sophomore effort, Sweet Insomnia. While I didn't find this album to be quite as inventive as the debut, it was nevertheless an irresistible listen. I don't know what the magic number is for how many times you should listen to an album before reviewing it, but let me tell you, this one was played on repeat for me for days before and after I did my review. And while it should be obvious to anyone who watches this channel that R&B isn't my primary genre of music, Gallant quite simply blows me away. I don't know why this guy isn't a huge star yet, and I hope to see that change. His talent deserves to be heard. Okay, at number 2 on my list is an album that was actually my highest rated album of the year. In fact, I think it was my highest rated album in the history of this channel so far. So, why isn't it number 1? Well, in a way, I felt like that would be cheating. You see, Originals by Prince, in spite of its title, isn't really an original album. It's an archival release, an absolutely incredible and essential archival release, no doubt. But it didn't seem quite fair to rank it above contemporary artists that are, well, alive and actively striving to make an artistic statement with their music. Unquestionably, the songs on Originals are great, as are the performances, but we can't overlook the fact that this release was assembled by a production team, not by the actual artist, and these songs were never intended to be compiled into anything resembling a cohesive album. Now I know, all of that sounds like negative criticism, but I don't want you to take it that way. After all, I ranked Originals all the way up at number 2 on my year-end list because in spite of those technicalities, this so-called album is still full of some of the best music to be released this year, or any year. So before I reveal my pick for the best album of 2019, let's recap the list. At number 10, we started with Anak Ko from indie artist Jay Som. Number 9 was Frank Turner's concept album No Man's Land. And number 8, Feral Roots by rockers Rival Sons. Number 7 is critical darling Lana Del Rey with Norman fucking Rockwell. In 6th place is the perfect pop of Carly Rae Jepsen's Dedicated. At number 5, it's Vampire Weekend with Father of the Bride. In 4th place, we have country soul singer Yola's debut album Walk Through Fire. Number 3 is Sweet Insomnia from R&B singer Gallant. And at number 2, the iconic Prince with the incredible vault release Originals. Alright, now at number 1 for 2019, I've picked an album that's actually grown on me since its release back in June. If I was re-reviewing it today, I'd actually rate it a step higher than I did originally. Still, I know Western Stars by Bruce Springsteen was a very polarizing album for fans. No doubt the more mellow 70s AM gold-inspired sound on this album was a big departure from what fans were used to from the boss. Born to Run Part 2, it is not. And if that's not your thing, I get it. But the more I listened to Western Stars and the more I thought about what Bruce was doing here, what he was actually accomplishing by embracing this theme and applying it so effectively to the album format, the more I came to appreciate the artistry of it all. When I reviewed the album, I talked about it being a sort of cinematic experience, and I think that's a great way of thinking about the album, actually. After all, you don't just watch random scenes from a movie, you watch the whole thing from start to finish. You get to know the characters, the story, the settings, and ultimately, that's the best way to experience Western Stars. It's an album that adds up to so much more than the sum of its parts, and if this is truly to be a list of the best albums of the year, I think that it's fitting to reward one that so perfectly encapsulates the lost art of the album. So there you have it, the 2019 edition of the Track by Track Best Albums of the Year. As always, I'm sure there's more than a few that you may disagree with or others that you think that I might have missed. Ultimately, though, it's all just my personal opinion and everyone's taste certainly varies. With that in mind, I welcome your comments. What albums were your favorites from 2019? Which ones do you think got overlooked? And which ones did you think were wildly overrated? And how do you feel about archival music like Prince competing against new releases for a spot on any Best of the Year list? Let me know what you think down in the comments section below. Once again, my name's Kyle, and this has been Track by Track. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Plus, check out some of these other videos below that I think you might also enjoy. And of course, be sure to click subscribe, because true music fans always want new releases the day they come out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.